history. I've leased it from the government, and I've spent the last 5 years setting up a kind of biological preserve. Really spectacular, spared no expense.
What kind of park is this?
It's right up your alley.
What do they got in there, King Kong?
Dinosaurs and man. Two species separated by 65 million years of evolution, just been suddenly thrown back into the mix together. How can we possibly have the slightest idea what to expect?
Hold on to your butts.
Sensors are failing all over the park. I can't get Jurassic Park back online.
Come on. We gotta get out of here.
Red raptors.
They should all be destroyed.
Clever girl.
Mr. Hammond, I think we're back in business.
Jurassic Park.
In the summer of 1993, Jurassic Park made a massive impact, becoming the most successful film ever made. People of all ages loved it, and they went back to it over and over again, making other movies hitting that summer suffer in box office profits, as everyone was obsessed with Jurassic Park and not particularly concerned with the likes of Last Action Hero and Dennis the Menace. Its state-of-the-art visual effects would change the industry, and with its popularity it came with a wealth of merchandise, with everything you could think of had the Jurassic Park logo slapped on it. Kids wanted the McDonald's meals, the jumpers, t-shirts, pencil cases, toys, and of course, the video games. Many in the industry knew Jurassic Park was going to be something special, and nearly 100 companies jumped at the chance to be part of it very early on. With the rights available to make video games, Ocean Software, who had success with Robocop and Batman for the home computers, with the likes of the ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64 and Amiga, had been at the forefront with licensed video games for the European market, and come the early 90s had moved into developing games for the Nintendo and Super Nintendo. They would grab the rights to produce a game for the SNES, NES and Game Boy, but would also provide a version for the Amiga and DOS PC, geared towards Europe. Other developers competed for the Sega consoles, with Activision and Acclaim bidding for it, but would lose out to Sega themselves, who passed on the coding duties to Blue Sky Software, who had recently coded The Little Mermaid for the Sega Mega Drive. With the movie scheduled to be released on the 11th of June, the games for all the consoles didn't arrive on time, but Sega would be the first to hit the market in late August, and its delay had no effect on its success. In June of 1993, Sega Visions magazine interviewed Blue Sky Software, who were based in San Diego, about the process of making the game. At this point they had spent the last 15 months developing it. From the beginning they wanted to go with a traditional platformer, not original by any means, but they had the unique idea of being able to control Alan Grant after his first encounter with a T-Rex, or as a Velociraptor, who was in pursuit of Grant after it escaped from its enclosure. The 12 members of Blue Sky, with 9 dedicated to being artists and animators obsessed over dinosaurs, visiting the local Natural History Museum. The lead artist Doug TenNapel, who would go on to create Earthworm Jim, was responsible for coordinating the graphics team. In efforts to animate Alan Grant, they filmed team member Mark Dobratz dressed as Alan, running, jumping and climbing. This helped get the smooth animation they wanted. Once digitized, the artists would change and manipulate the footage to fit what they needed to make it work within the game's engine. Animating the raptor was a different kind of challenge. To understand how these dinosaurs moved, Doug and his team of animators consulted the same experts used for the film. Each dinosaur had to be studied in detail, noting their size, shape, mass and anatomy. The team made use of models similar to the ones used in the production of the movie. By using stop-motion photography, the team was able to create animated sequences of all the prehistoric creatures that would feature in the game. Because the raptors are the central dinosaurs and can be controlled by the player, they would have the greatest number of animated sequences, with 20 or more different movements. While some of the artists were working on the animation, the rest of the team were busy creating the backgrounds, some of which extend to 20 or 30 Mega Drive screens. Backgrounds are created with a computer paint program, and then compressed using a tiling technique. Tiling is a process which breaks an image down into a small number of tiles, which are then combined to create the original image. By using a small number of tiles over and over, and by flipping and rotating tiles, the background artists can fit bigger, more complicated backgrounds into their fairly large 16 meg cartridge. The team at the time were also tasked with coding Aladdin. but they had fallen behind on schedule, as they had become fully focused on Jurassic Park, and the coding duties would be passed on to Disney and Virgin Games. The Blue Sky team did add a little reference to their involvement with Aladdin, with the genie lamp hidden in the Jurassic Park map. With the game being the first to hit store shelves, it went on to sell a huge amount of copies, making Sega $13 million. But how was the game received by the press? Well, it was pretty mixed. CVG magazine were less than thrilled, awarding it 65%. They said the graphics and digital sprites were impressive, but felt the controls were dodgy, in particular controlling the Raptor, and its inclusion felt like an afterthought. There was plenty of good ideas in the game, however, but it was let down by poor execution. Games Master magazine were also unimpressed, awarding it 68%, saying the game was unoriginal, going with another platformer, there's nothing new on display, and you were better off playing Flashback. Mean Machines, however, were far more positive, giving it 88%, with Digital Foundry's Richard Ledbetter saying, "Initially it looks like a less polished version of Flashback. However, this game has an atmosphere that is, to my mind, a lot better. The myriad of different dinosaurs, all well animated and in fine sampled voice, really does make a real difference to the game. It's also very tough. The addition of the Raptor game option also increases longevity. I can't say this is the greatest platform game I've played, there are better examples out there. However, Jurassic Park is good fun and well worth taking a look at." Stateside, the US magazine GamePro were just as positive, saying, "Jurassic Park won't disappoint you, even if you haven't seen the film. Standing alone as a side-scroller, it's action-packed and fun for hours on end. Can a video game be as popular as a blockbuster it's based on? This game will dino score." Sega's in-house team would handle the 8-bit versions for the Master System and Sega Game Gear, with the US only getting the Game Gear version as the Master System had already run out of steam there. The 8-bit version would again follow the traditional platform style of gameplay, but they would thankfully mix it up with a couple of card driving segments and giving you the opportunity to choose which stage to select. The 8-bit version surprisingly offered the most when it came to visually telling the player the story. The Mega Drive would have a couple of animated sequences near the beginning, but would rely heavily on text to move the plot forward. The 8-bit versions would feature an opening sequence as Grant visits the island, and cutscenes between levels as you capture the dinosaurs, which offered an extra level of presentation. The Game Gear, with its lower resolution, would as usual zoom in on the image to fit the handheld screen. But they also changed the sprite you control, no longer looking like Alan Grant. The game's manual says it's Alan, but to me, with the character's lighter hair, I would say it's Laura Dern's character, Ellie Sattler. When it came to the reviews, the 8-bit versions didn't fare well, with the Master System version being largely ignored by the press in favour of the Game Gear. CVG gave the handheld version port 75%, saying unless you are fed up with Jurassic Park, then it's worth giving the Game Gear version a look. Although there's 5 levels, you can only access the last one if you get through the first 4 without using continues, which is a nice touch, especially because if you do use continues, then the game's quite easy to get through. However, Sega Power, despite giving the Master System version 54%, hated it on the Game Gear, awarding it 25%. This is another all too familiar story of great graphics and dire gameplay, set against the pathetic backdrop of yet another disgracefully wasted film license. Sega, in their efforts to take advantage of CD technology for their upcoming Mega CD add-on, spent $10 million setting up a new studio in 1992 called Multimedia, purchasing Silicon Graphics workstations, the same computers used to develop the CGI for Jurassic Park. The studio wouldn't last long, with many titles they worked on never getting a release, as the appeal of FMV games didn't catch on. The audio department of the studio was spun off in 1994 into the Sega Music Group, and the multimedia studio was closed, but the first title they started work on was Jurassic Park. The game was originally supposed to use 3 different gaming perspectives, but as it got too big to manage and implement into the game, they scaled it back to focus on the first-person perspective, making a point-and-click adventure game, as there are very few point-and-click style games on the consoles. Though they were very popular on PCs at the time, they thought the style might stand out on a console. The developers wanted to create an environment where the player can see the dinosaurs behave and how they interact with humans, starting out with drawings that expanded landscapes with up to 4 screens, which were first hand-drawn and then scanned into an Apple Mac. The SGI machines were used to create 3D animations of the dinosaurs, in particular the raptors, that would be inserted into the game. The composer recorded foreboding sounds and panned music around within the stereo track to create the sense you are in the jungle, with the game making use of the Q sound format that Capcom would take advantage of for their CPS2 hardware. Sega enlisted the support of Dr. Robert Bakker, a prominent paleontologist who advised the production of the Jurassic Park film. He wrote a field guide for the 7 species of dinosaurs featured in the game, and he features as part of the production's full-motion video segments. Sound planner David J. Vlosa said in an interview, "Working on Jurassic Park was also very chaotic. We were pioneering the abilities and features of the Genesis and CD-ROM systems while trying to create the killer content for it. A lot of it was PC game design approach, but constrained to an 8-bit colour side-scrolling engine with FM sound mixed with CD audio and samples. It was amazing that we got it done and shipped."
T-Rex had a double-jointed jaw, could open its mouth so wide it could swallow an entire Guernsey cow.
When the reviews were published for the CD game, it fared better than a Mega Drive title, thanks to it doing something completely different, but Mean Machines magazine weren't in love with it, awarding it 73%. It's nice that Sega have tried to do something different with the license, but behind this well-presented front end lies a very simplistic game. For the most part, the puzzle element in Jurassic CD simply requires the player to take any objects they find to rather obvious locations. Yes, there's the odd dinosaur to be seen, but there's never any real feeling of menace generated, one of the film's strongest points. The potential for a dino blockbuster was fantastic, but this is another missed opportunity to add to the list. GameMaster awarded it 81%, saying, "This is the best of the bunch. The graphics, while suitably moody and atmospheric, are hardly mind-blowing. The scenes have been rendered using powerful machines, but when whittled down to the Mega CD's poxy colour palette, they lose an awful lot of clarity." The official Sega magazine awarded it 92%, saying, "Of all the console conversions of Jurassic Park, this is the one that comes closest to conveying the atmosphere of the movie. All the locations are highly detailed and each species of dinosaur has its own behaviour patterns. If you're in the market for a new CD game, this is a brilliant title."
A few months later.
1994 was a big year for Sega in the arcades with their move to 3D graphics, which was kicked off by Virtua Racing from 1992. 1994 saw Sega release Virtua Cop and Daytona USA, which would dominate the arcades. When Jurassic Park arrived nearly a year after the film, there wasn't much interest. Even the industry magazine Replay gave it little coverage, and the lack of advertising by Sega seemed to indicate they weren't seeing it as a winning title. The game cabinet resembles the rear of the Ford Explorer tour vehicles used in the film. The cabinet includes a moving seat, also used in Sega's 1991 light gun shooter Rail Chase. The seat is powered by hydraulic pistons to move the seating according to the action on the screen, but the game wouldn't make use of light guns, but sticks instead to aim. The game makes use of the System 32 hardware, the final board in the Superscaler series, and Jurassic Park Arcade would be the last title to make use of it. The game would make use of 2D sprites that are scaled to give the impression of a 3D environment, really pushing the hardware as the developers throw the player into constant chaos. Not all video game magazines reviewed arcade cabinets, most often they would preview them, but Games World magazine would review it, awarding it 63%. Commenting on the novelty of the cabinet, as you sit in the car as the hydraulic chairs throw you around as the dinosaurs charge at the screen. It's fast and action-packed and was visually impressive, but its repetitive nature wore thin. With the game costing £1 a go, I don't think many kids were willing to part with too much of their pocket money to try and complete it, and would probably save their pennies for another go on Mortal Kombat 2 or say King of Fighters 94.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Ocean Software would spend a reported $3 million to get the license to develop their version for the Nintendo consoles and Amiga. Gary Bracey, who had spent his career dealing with the movie studios, was shocked by the rising costs in the past decade. Paying a few thousand back in the 80s was now forking out millions. Steven Spielberg was involved early on with talks with Gary and wanted a game that was groundbreaking. Spielberg, being an avid gamer himself, had a hands-on involvement to ensure that the final result was as faithful as possible to his original idea. Gary said he would not allow any Mario-type figure to start jumping all over the dinosaurs. Ocean Software in recent years set up a US development studio to take advantage of the local talent. The US team would develop the Nintendo games, with their UK-based office handling the Amiga and DOS ports. Back in the 90s, the development of the Super Nintendo version wasn't covered in much detail throughout the magazines. The Amiga port, however, would be covered in the One magazine in July of 1993. But thankfully in issue 223 of Retro Gamer, they would provide a retrospective on the SNES game, interviewing the lead designer, Jonathan Beard. Jonathan recalled it took 9 months to complete the game on the Super Nintendo. The team felt it made sense to go with an open world, then with a linear side-scroller. It felt more in line with the IP and the player's situation. Matt Wood, Jurassic Park's co-designer and graphic artist on the Amiga and PC, said, "We actually went through about 3 or 4 game designs. before we had one that we were really happy with. Initially, it was looking like another Ocean license. You know, the sort that everybody hates, with a sub-game here and a little puzzle there. But we thought, no, this won't do at all, and so we ended up with something very different. The development team were handed the script, stills, a tape of sound effects, concept art from Universal, and a few basic 3D animations, but they were a bit unsure how the dinosaurs would look in the movie. Ocean Software thankfully entered into a relationship with Kenner, who were going to produce the toys, and they were shown prototypes. The US team would pass on their resources to the UK team, so everyone was kept in the loop with the dinosaur designs. FPS games were becoming very popular in 1993, with Doom making a massive impact on the PC, arriving very shortly after the release of Jurassic Park on the Super Nintendo. The development team had been playing id Software's previous title, Wolfenstein 3D, a lot in the office, and would use that as a source of inspiration to include an FPS section in Jurassic Park. Jonathan credits Paul Robinson for the design. Paul was one of the programmers and a kid genius, he says. He took the Mode 7 ability from the SNES and created a 3D room out of it. I remember all of our minds were blown. The original plan was to have a separate top-down interior version like the rest of the game, but seeing Paul's work changed that plan. Jonathan said it wasn't about pushing the limits of the SNES, but rather creating something that could be fun for young players to get into. We all just wanted to make a great game, worthy of what we felt was going to be a great movie. This idea would also be implemented on the Amiga and PC versions, where these systems handle the FPS sections far more smoothly, with the PC version proving the best. At the time, seeing 3D like this on the Amiga was very unique. Matt Wood said, "The graphics window is about 3 or 4 times bigger than Legends of Valor's, and running twice as fast at around 10 frames per second. My god." All the games that have been done in that format before have been adventure games, but this is more of a hack and shoot 'em up. On the basic Amiga, the graphics will be in 32 colours. There will be a lot more colours in the A1200 version, which will be pretty much identical to the PC port. As the US team were also working concurrently on the NES and Game Boy conversions of the game, and with this being the last NES game Ocean would work on, they were trading ideas back and forth. So that presented new difficulties in balancing resources, which Jonathan describes as pretty challenging for everyone involved. While the Amiga and NES versions of the game, along with the action sequences, both feature escort and raft missions, the Super Nintendo port cuts them away, sticking to its top-down and FPS mechanics. During the testing of the game, the difficulty was always a talking point, as the game didn't feature an option to save the game or even a basic password system. There were checkpoints available, but once you died in the game, or you had to turn the console off, you would have to start from the very beginning. Ocean games were never known for being easy. Their early titles for the SNES, Robocop 3 and Lethal Weapon, were notorious for their difficulty. Jonathan remembers how those were different times. You were encouraged to make games difficult for longevity. Also, you didn't have the thorough testing and gameplay balancing that we have now. Jonathan blames Ocean for the saving problem, as the cart was going to feature a battery backup ROM, but the studio told him at the last moment that it wasn't going to be. It left us no time to implement a password system. Looking back, it seems crazy to me that Ocean were that short-sighted. It really wasn't that much more money per cartridge. That last-minute decision by Ocean led to subsequent problems in the design. As Jonathan remembers, the team hurried to make some quick last-minute adjustments. Jurassic Park is one of a limited bunch of games on the console that would actually get a patched version. A later CART 1.1 version was made available, with some fixes to the collision detection, which makes it harder to get stuck on walls, especially in the first-person sections. The critics were pretty impressed with Ocean's efforts. They had their complaints, of course, but no one seemed to complain about the lack of a save feature or password system. In Nintendo Magazine System, despite giving it 80%, the critic Rad was pretty negative, saying, "Unfortunately, Ocean have completely fumbled this one. The graphics are very nice, but the speed of the game is incredibly slow. The game consists of too much aimless wandering around the park. It had loads of good ideas spoilt by poor execution, and once completed, there was no desire to go back to it." Total Magazine awarded it 84%, saying, "What Jurassic Park lacks in originality and variety, it more than makes up for cosmetics and sheer pace. A good, straightforward action game." CVG awarded it 87%, saying, "Jurassic Park on the SNES is vastly superior and totally different to the Mega Drive version. It looks smashing, with hefty detailed sprites and some quite outstanding sounds. Both the indoor and outdoor elements of gameplay make for a challenge, but there's a brutal difficulty curve which proves initially frustrating." They felt it was Ocean's best tie-in to date, but felt the 3D sections were a bit rough. SNES Force magazine loved the game, giving it 92%, saying it had superb graphics, easy to play, difficult to finish. Jurassic Park is a very rare thing, a film tie-in which actually makes full use of the license. Nintendo Magazine System awarded the NES port 88%, and said Ocean's NES games are, with the odd exception, getting to be the best for the machine recently, and Jurassic Park is another worthy title to add to the pile. Granted, the programmers have taken more than a few liberties with regards to the plot, but in terms of gameplay, NES Jurassic is sterling stuff. Total Magazine gave it a slightly lower score of 79%, saying NES owners are increasingly less well catered for these days, so it's nice to get something actually worth playing. It's not brilliant, but it's not bad either. The Game Boy port would receive 85% by GB Action Magazine. They said, unfortunately, the graphics, although well above par for a movie licensed game, are not overly impressive. They are clear enough and bold enough, but as in the movie, the dinosaurs steal the show. A bold attempt at a movie license is a very rare thing, and I haven't seen a more successful one in 65 million years. Oops, a Jurassic pun, had to sneak in somewhere, I'm sorry. Like its Super Nintendo counterpart, the Amiga PC game did get strong reviews, probably even better than the SNES, with CVG awarding it 89%, saying, two quite distinctive games have combined to make one unique one in Jurassic Park. The Amiga and PC versions are equally involving on the outdoor sections, if unoriginal, yet it is inside that the PC game manages to take centre stage, lavishing itself in full screen, smooth and naturally wowish 3D effects that will leave you sweaty and tense. While the Amiga version is commendable, it doesn't really cut it on the 3D side, but that's a technical problem. Still, Jurassic is easily Ocean's best tie-in to date. The One magazine gave it the same rating of 89% and summarised, in the past Ocean's film licenses have had a bit of a rough ride from the critics, mainly because a lot of them were crap to say the least. However, their reputation improved greatly with the cracking Addams Family, and is now further enhanced by what they've done with Jurassic Park. Yes, I'm pleased to report that Jurassic Park is a bit of a corker. Graphically, it's a real treat. The Chaos Engine top-viewed sections move very smoothly, and the 3D sections are detailed. The 3D bits you can spend long minutes wandering about with nothing to fight, and aiming at the small creatures in the top-viewed stages can be tricky. But even so, at the end of the day, if you like dinos, the movie, or simply a good game, you'll love this. But Amiga Format were less than impressed and gave it 70%, saying, shoot-'em-up adventure game that promises so much early on, but ultimately fails to deliver the goods. A big and attractive but disappointing game. There were high hopes for the 3DO version of Jurassic Park. Universal MCA had set up their own company to develop a game to take advantage of the new state-of-the-art 32-bit CD console. With Universal producing in-house with a team of 10, the game took advantage of footage from the film and included John Williams' main theme, making it the only version to do so. The early previews in the press promised a lot, typical buzzwords to get people excited, but nothing was being shown, with it being kept as a closely guarded secret. There were even reports of it being a pack-in title for the console, but after a number of delays it wouldn't arrive until May of 1994, lasting 14 months in development. When Jurassic Park Interactive arrived, all the hype evaporated, as the end result was just 5 mini-games. The game's interface is a computer screen that allows the player to navigate a map of the island to select one of 5 games programmed by Dennis Nedry. Players have to locate various guests on the map once the player successfully relocates all the island's guests to the helipad by completing the minigames. Although footage from the film is included in the opening sequence, actual shots of actors' faces are notably edited out and replaced with hilarious lookalikes for the cutscenes and images. When it came to the reviews, you would be surprised to find out they weren't that negative. Video Games Magazine gave it 7 out of 10, saying, Jurassic Park Interactive for 3DO chomps at the 16-bit and delivers a game that's a strange mix. You will play all types of game genres, a driving game as you're being chased by the T-Rex, a Wolfenstein 3D level with raptors, and my favourite, a spitter shooting gallery. There's even some classic video game action like dino versions of Space Invaders and Asteroids. The only thing lacking in the game is originality. A slight disappointment, but worth a try. CVG Magazine awarded it 65%, saying, while there are some interesting sub-levels to tackle and the basic gist of Jurassic Park is sound, the whole thing's badly implemented. It doesn't feel like you're playing a game, more a compilation of titles which don't hang together well. The best part has to be the Doom/Alien vs Predator race against the Velociraptors, but even that gets dull because there's so little to do. A great idea, it just hasn't come off. Stick to the movie, you see more dinosaurs. EGM and their bizarre review said the graphics were some of the best they'd ever seen, and the only bad thing about it is that the critic had to go out and buy a 3DO. The game was that good. As the official sequel to Jurassic Park wouldn't hit theatres until 1997, game developers who had spent money on licensing the IP weren't going to sit there and do nothing with it until it expires, so Sega and Ocean Software would create unofficial sequels that would arrive in late 1994 in time for when people could purchase Jurassic Park on VHS. Blue Sky Software got the opportunity to return to Jurassic Park and had the chance to correct some of the criticisms the first game received. Now the game was faster, the slowdown was eliminated, it had more action with Alan Grant now having the ability to use guns and grenades, you could select which level you wanted to tackle first, and the sprites would be refreshed to make them stand out more from the backgrounds with a black outline around them. The levels were far bigger, making it a lot easier for the player when using the Raptor to navigate their way through the stages, and it offered some extra elements of gameplay with Grant riding a dinosaur to escape from the InGen agents, who have landed on the island to collect any remaining eggs and DNA samples, and you have to stop them. Despite the improvements, the gaming press was now tired of the formula, and were pretty harsh with their opinions. Dave Perry of Games World awarded it 35%, saying, "This is a game that deserves to be placed inside a microwave, not a console. They have taken the original Sega version of Jurassic Park and messed it up beyond recognition. The animation is jerky and the characters have a strange blue fuzz around them. This is destined for extinction." Mean Machine Sega awarded it 59%, saying, "This is a very sorry excuse for a platformer, with clumsy graphics and bland backdrops giving an indication of the bleak gameplay. While Rampage Edition is a faster moving game than the original, it's also dull to play with very little variety. Granted, the dino riding bit was a laugh, but even this cannot save the game from obscurity. Don't believe the hype and give this a miss." Sega Power gave it 70% and said, "An improvement on the original, but if my puns can be excused from the table, still a bit of a dino bore."
InGen must be eliminated. I will have control of Jurassic Park.
Ocean Software would play it safe, returning to a traditional side-scrolling platform game for the SNES, with some gameplay elements taken from their old licensed title Platoon, as your character can walk into the background to enter another location. The story focuses around Biosyn, who want to take over control of Jurassic Park from InGen. A specialist team is sent to the island. You play as a Marine working for InGen to stop them. With the critics being unimpressed with Sega's efforts for Rampage Edition, Ocean's sequel was warmly received, with Nintendo Magazine System awarding it 82%, saying, "Although simple in visual design and somewhat unoriginal in gameplay, this is nonetheless a finely polished platform blaster." Total Magazine awarded it 85%, and summarised that Ocean appeared to have spent the money wisely on the game, rather than investing in the hype this time, and good on them. The game is easy to get into, and thoroughly engrossing. The only major flaw is that the dinosaurs aren't particularly intelligent. This means that they are not very frightening, and so misses the point of the license somewhat. Still, this serves as a top shoot-em-up with an imaginative plot and loads of character. Frankly, that's a rarity these days. The Game Boy version, just called Jurassic Park 2, doesn't feature Biosyn, and has you control Alan Grant as he returns to the island. Again, another side-scroller, as you work your way across 4 zones on different parts of the island, collecting magnetic keycards to open security gates. The game was awarded 77% by the magazine GB Action, with the critics saying, "Perhaps I was expecting a little too much from the sequel. The new game engine is just the same old platform one, with neatly drawn sprites, good animation and totally dull gameplay." Nintendo Power praised the Game Boy version for its controls and music, and wrote that, "In some ways, it's better than the SNES counterpart. However, the magazine criticised it for having no Super Game Boy features, and for not being challenging enough." Over the years, we saw 2 more sequels on the big screen, and then the franchise will be given a new lease of life with the Jurassic World series in 2015. But to give a brief mention, there were some modern titles based on the first film. Developer Telltale Games licensed the IP for Jurassic Park before any new film was announced back in 2010. Their title, Jurassic Park the Game, was released for the Xbox 360, PS3 and PC in 2011. This was an episodic graphic adventure game made up of 4 episodes. The gameplay was your straightforward point-and-click adventure with quick-time events. It focuses on events after the film, with a team on the island to retrieve a canister of dinosaur embryos, which was stolen by Dennis Nedry during the film and subsequently lost in the jungle. The game wasn't received warmly on release, with complaints of weak puzzles, that it was not fun to play, and barely interactive. It was seen as a hammy but watchable sequel to the first movie. In 2015, developer Raw Thrills, which is owned by Eugene Jarvis, who worked on classics such as Defender, Robotron, Smash TV and Total Carnage, released Jurassic Park Arcade, a light gun shooter which is based on the original Jurassic Park trilogy, featuring 9 levels as a security team are sent to the island to retrieve 1 dinosaur from each species. Quite a common title in bowling alleys and seaside resorts in the UK, so not too difficult to find in the wild. Announced in December of 2023 was Jurassic Park Survival for the PS5, Xbox and PC, which is set after the events of the first film. Outside of a trailer which features pre-rendered cutscenes, a few moments of gameplay featuring FPS segments, there hasn't been much talk about it. Fans feared it was cancelled, but it's still apparently on the cards to be released. And finally, for those who grew up in the 90s, limited run games would offer a heavy slice of nostalgia with the Classic Games Collection for all the modern systems, which features all the Ocean Software games minus the Amiga and PC ports, and the Sega version and Rampage edition. It's unfortunately missing the 8-bit versions and the Mega CD port. As a young teenager, my first experience with the game is the Mega Drive version, which to be honest I really enjoyed at the time. Playing it now, Alan Grant is stiff to control, as they clearly took inspiration from the likes of Prince of Persia, but it just isn't as smooth. It's nicely presented with its graphics, though front-loaded to impress. As you go through the game, it looks less appealing. The game's engine unfortunately suffers from constant slowdown. Though it tries to stay faithful to the film, it does take ideas from the book to offer extra variety with the levels. Having the option to play as the Raptor is a nice addition, but it's obvious the later levels clearly weren't designed for the Raptor in mind. It didn't control well as you make massive leaps everywhere, often on faith to get around the stage. To be honest, I always tended to stick with Alan Grant when returning to it, and it can be completed in like 30 minutes. It's a pretty short game, hamstrung by some random spikes of difficulty. Rampage Edition corrects a lot of the problems and is a better game. I'm pretty shocked the critics were so harsh on it at the time. The Master System game, which got very little attention on release, is a surprisingly good title. It makes great efforts to explain the plot of the movie with cutscenes. You get to choose where you want to go on the map. It's not so linear as the Mega Drive version and offers variety in its gameplay. It's a bit sluggish to control, but graphically it's strong for the old 8-bit console, a solid licensed title. The Mega CD game is slow, but a very chilled experience. You never get a sense you are in danger, however. It's a simple point-and-click adventure that would have been best served on a PC or Mac at the time, instead of the Sega CD due to its hardware limitations, but I appreciate the effort that went into this version. The Super Nintendo game I would play at the time as a young teenager like the Mega Drive game, and with it being totally different, it made the experience of playing another Jurassic Park game very exciting. I was, like many other young teenagers, a bit frustrated with the lack of a save feature, as the game could take around 2 hours to complete if you knew where you were going. The 3D sections, though impressive for a Super Nintendo at the time, were just way too slow to progress through. You get lost very easily. Having a player's guide at hand was helpful though. With the effort and time you put into it, the ending is a massive letdown. You just have a repeat of the opening with the Mode 7 graphics of the island as you depart. Not much of a reward, and there isn't much there to make you want to return to it. On the graphics front, it certainly feels like a more polished game compared to the Sega efforts, and you could kill the dinosaurs with all manner of weapons, but I do prefer the more realistic look of the dinosaurs in a Sega port, whereas the SNES version takes on a more cartoony look, fitting more in line with Nintendo's attitude towards aiming their products more at children than teenagers. The 8-bit versions by Ocean are basically stripped down versions of the SNES game, and with those not including those frustratingly slow FPS segments, they are probably a bit more fun to play. Chaos Continues is a perfectly executed platformer that looks decent, but there is little variety in the stages and soon becomes very repetitive. The Amiga/PC versions are pretty much the same as the SNES game. They do have a more realistic look with their design, though looking less colourful, a tad more drab overall, which you may prefer or not, depends on your taste. The 3D sections are a vast improvement however, but not to the level of quality of Wolfenstein and Doom. Having the field of view shoved into the corner showcased the limitations in the hardware and coding at the time, but it was a strong effort from Ocean, with it being one of their last licensed titles. The 3DO game is hilariously bad, clearly made by folk who don't have much experience with developing games, or if they did, they lacked the creative spark to adapt the film, which the other developers on the other consoles didn't appear to struggle with. So much power at their disposal, but all they could dish out was some bland minigames. The arcade version by Sega is fun in short bursts, and often hilarious with how over the top it is by throwing so many dinosaurs at you at once. Ideally it's best played in an arcade than via emulation, but it does look dated compared to Sega's other efforts that year, and lacks the wow factor of another licensed title they produced with Alien 3 The Gun. When returning to these old games, you are pretty much in safe hands with the popular consoles and computers. Time and effort was put into these ports. They weren't rushed out to make a quick buck, unlike the attitude of distributor LJN. Due to the cost of the license, Sega and Ocean Software couldn't cut costs on the development to churn out something bland and forgettable and risk losing money. But as highlighted, they aren't perfect or the best licensed games from that time. Obviously it's best to avoid the 3DO version, unless you want to beat some sort of speed run. But with the others, they all have their merits, and what I love about this period of gaming is that there is a lot of choice of different types of games. Once we hit the world of 32-bit consoles with the Saturn and PlayStation, the games would be the same across the board, but back in the day, we had choice tailored for each hardware, which as a young teenager was exciting to experience. Whatever version of Jurassic Park you had as a kid, most often your friend had a different version to play. so you could experience the movie as a game in a new way. Despite some of the mixed reviews at the time, it's nice to see Sega and Ocean Software delivered above expectations for what people expected from licensed games. The old attitude of movie games being rubbish was quickly becoming a thing of the past. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button and hit the bell to be notified of my latest reviews. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain access to exclusive videos and take part in Q&As, follow the link below.